My mother didn't whisper it. She said it loud enough for the entire room to hear. I wish you were never born. But what happened next changed everything. Delmonico's was the kind of place people booked months in advance. White tablecloths, dim lighting, live jazz humming through the air. It smelled like truffle oil and expensive wine, and tonight it was supposed to smell like celebration. Oki had earned it. Graduating, getting hired, finally stepping out of the long shadow her sister Ashley cast over their family. She'd spent the entire afternoon imagining this dinner differently. Her mom smiling, her dad raising a toast, maybe, just maybe, someone saying they were proud. She rehearsed responses in her head as she walked into the restaurant, clutching the small gift bag she'd bought for them. A framed photo from her commencement. But the real script had already been written by someone else. Her mom barely looked at her before starting. Ashley was accepted into the executive program. You know, the one you couldn't get into. Oki swallowed. She'd learned how to smile through comments like that. Tiny cuts disguised as casual facts. But tonight she wasn't alone. Around the table sat her professor, her manager, and 2 colleagues. People who only knew her as brilliant, capable, promising. She tried to steer the conversation. I'm really excited about the position in Seattle. The team feels like a good fit and... Her mother sighed loudly, waving a hand. Ashley would have gotten something better. She always does. A few awkward chuckles rippled. Forks paused midair. The jazz felt too soft to cover the tension. Oki's chest tightened, but she still clung to hope. Some validation, some acknowledgement, anything. The waiter poured sparkling water, glasses clinked, and she tried again. I just hope you're proud. It wasn't easy getting here. Her mother leaned back, eyes narrowing. And then, with the clarity of someone who didn't care who heard, she said it. I wish you were never born. Shul gasp. One from a waiter passing by. Someone dropped a fork. Her manager's mouth opened, then shut, like he was afraid to breathe. Oki didn't cry. She didn't argue. Her body moved before her mind caught up. Her hands flat on the table, pushing her chair back with a soft scrape that felt louder than any scream. The room watched her stand, watched her pick up her coat, watched her walk away from the table where she had spent 22 years begging for belonging outside. Seattle rain hit her face, cold and cleansing, like the sky was washing something off her. She didn't look back. Not at the restaurant, not at the people frozen in their seats, not at the life she'd been shrinking to survive. Because she wasn't breaking anymore. She was done. But I didn't know that walking out of that restaurant was just the beginning. What I did next would change my entire family forever. To understand why those words shattered me, you need to know where I came from. I grew up in a 2-story house in Rochester, the kind with peeling white paint and a yard my dad swore he'd fix next summer. The house wasn't big, but somehow it always felt too small to hold the reality that there were 2 daughters living inside it, and only one of them was worth noticing. Ashley arrived in the world with fireworks. At least that's how my parents told the story. She smiled at 2 weeks old. She started talking before 9 months. She's special. I was born first, but Ashley was born extraordinary. I have early memories of sitting on the carpet with coloring books while relatives passed her around like a prized possession. Someone once asked me how school was going, but before I could answer, my mom cut in with, Ashley's been singing non-stop. She's basically a natural performer. I was 6 years old, learning that silence kept me from disappointment. By the time I was 14, I'd mastered the art of being exceptional in the quietest possible way. When I won first place in a regional math competition, I came home clutching the certificate like it was proof I existed. I handed it to my mom while she was chopping onions in the kitchen. She glanced at it for less than a second. That's nice, she said, already turning back to the cutting board. But Ashley's making real impact. She just got invited to perform at the community gala. Real impact. That became the measuring stick in my household. My achievements weren't dismissed because they were bad. They were dismissed because they weren't hers. I started working jobs as soon as I could. Tutoring, bussing tables, stock shifts at the grocery store. In high school I worked 3 nights a week and most weekends. In college I added 2 more. I paid my own fees, bought my own books, covered rent with tips and grit. And my parents' only contribution was the same question every semester. When are the payments due? Never. How are you managing? Do you need help? Are you okay? They weren't curious about the girl who held everything together. They were waiting for Ashley to be spectacular. Again. The truth is, I wasn't invisible because I lacked achievements. I was invisible because I wasn't convenient. When I got into Stanford, on scholarship, my advisor cried harder than my mother. Mrs. Green, 72, purple reading glasses, hugged me so tightly my ribs hurt. She told me it was the start of a life I deserved. Damn, why Mom's reaction? A lukewarm, "That's great, but don't get cocky. Ashley's applying to Columbia." That night I sat alone on my dorm room floor, acceptance letter in my lap, realizing I had spent almost 2 decades chasing a finish line that wasn't real. In my family, achievement wasn't about accomplishment. It was about who got to hold the microphone. And I wasn't even allowed on the stage. I spent 28 years being invisible in my own family. But that dinner at Delmonico's, that was the moment everything changed. Let me tell you what happened when I got home. When I got home that night, my phone was already blowing up. But it wasn't apologies I was receiving. Oki walked home through the Seattle rain, the city lights smearing into neon streaks against wet pavement. Her heels slapped the sidewalk with the dull rhythm of someone who'd stopped caring about noise, dignity, or how she looked to strangers passing by. Bellevue wasn't far from the restaurant, but it felt like she was crossing countries, leaving one version of herself behind with every step. Her apartment was dark when she entered. No warm lamps, no music, no signs of a life curated for comfort. Just a one-bedroom with cheap hardwood floors and the faint smell of takeout containers she hadn't thrown away. She didn't turn on the lights. She dropped her coat, kicked off her shoes, and slid down to sit on the floor, back against the door, breath fogging in the dimness. Her phone buzzed again. She blinked at the screen. 11 missed calls. All from her mother and father. Not a single voicemail. Just one text. One line. "You embarrassed us. Hope you're proud of yourself. No, are you okay? No, come home, let's talk." Not even anger disguised as concern. Just blame. Immediate, instinctive, effortless blame. Oki almost laughed, sharp and humorless, because she realized that for her parents, humiliation was a greater sin than cruelty. She wiped rain from her face, though she wasn't sure if it was rain anymore, and opened her banking app. She hadn't looked at it in weeks, but she knew exactly what she'd find. She'd set the transfers up during grad school, when she still believed love was a currency she could earn. 3 automatic payments queued up for processing that night. Utilities for the house she didn't live in. Ashley's tuition because she needs to focus on her future. The mortgage, half of it, because her parents just needed help until they stabilized. She hesitated, thumb hovering above the first cancel button. Not because she doubted her right to stop helping, but because she'd been conditioned to believe survival meant sacrificing herself. Her finger moved before fear talked her out of it. Click. Cancel. Utilities gone. Click. Cancel. Ashley's tuition gone. The third one made her pause longer. The mortgage was the one they never even thanked her for. The one that funded their comfort, their pride, their dinner reservations where they humiliated her with expensive wine in hand. She clicked. Cancel. 1. 3. Not loud actions. No fireworks. No applause. Just silence. But it wasn't the old silence, the lonely, aching kind she grew up inside of. This silence was clean, solid, peaceful. She lay back on the floor, staring at the ceiling, waiting for guilt, fear, or anxiety to grab her by the throat. None came. Just a strange, weightless sense of finally stepping into her own life. The next day, Michael showed up with 2 steaming bags of Thai takeout, because he didn't ask questions before showing up. He just knew when to. He sat cross-legged beside her on the floor, handing her a container of pad CW. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" He didn't say, "Maybe talk to them." He took one look at her swollen eyes and said, "About time you saved yourself. I thought canceling those payments would bring guilt. Instead, it brought something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. But my parents, they had no idea what was coming. For 3 weeks my phone stayed silent. And you know what? I didn't miss them. 3 weeks passed without a single call, text, apology or accusation. Just nothing. Not even a passive-aggressive message from Oki's mother reminding her of birthdays, bills, or unmet expectations. Silence, thick, uninterrupted, absolute tea first. Oki worried she'd feel empty without the noise of them. The constant background hum of criticism had been a soundtrack to her entire life. Without it, she expected emptiness. Void. Something painful. But there was nothing to mourn. Because she slowly realized. She didn't miss them. She missed the idea of them. The fantasy version of parents she'd convinced herself existed somewhere beneath the disappointment and conditional affection. The version who hugged her when she got into Stanford, showed up for performances or called to say, "We're proud." That version never existed. She'd been mourning fiction. And in that realization, something loosened. Work became more than a distraction. It became a refuge. The restructuring project she'd joined, messy, chaotic, falling apart at the seams, turned into a space where her voice mattered. Meetings where people actually listened. Rooms where her ideas changed outcomes instead of getting drowned out by someone louder. For the first time, a manager didn't hover or second-guess her. He trusted her judgment. "Run with it," he told her once, tossing a report onto her desk. "I'd do it myself, but you're better at this." Better. Not fine. Not better than nothing. Better. Then came the business magazine feature. A small publication, regional, but still. Someone reached out and wanted to talk to her. Not about her family. Not about trauma. But about resilience, innovation, leadership. She sat in a conference room with glass walls, sunlight flooding over her laptop, telling a stranger what it meant to rebuild systems without burning people out. And when the article went live, she expected a handful of likes and maybe one congratulatory email. IT exploded. Shares. Comments. Repost. Her inbox filled with messages from people she'd never met. Students, analysts, entrepreneurs, telling her that they'd lived versions of her story. That they'd rebuilt themselves after families broke them down. That they were rooting for her. Every message was a mirror held up to the truth she'd never considered. Other people saw her strength long before she did. With each day, confidence stopped being an act and started being a habit. Clarity stopped being a wish and became a constant companion. She was changing, quickly, deeply, irrevocably. And just when she thought she'd finally moved on, she came home one Friday night, Thai takeout in one hand, keys in the other, and froze. Her parents were standing at her door, smiling, as if nothing had happened. And what they wanted. It proved she'd made exactly the right decision. On a Tuesday afternoon, I found them waiting at my door. And what they said next proved everything I'd suspected about them was true. It was the kind of day that sucked the bones out of you. 12 hours of meetings, negotiations, and fire drills that left Oki's brain feeling like it had been wrung out and hung up to dry. She stepped out of the rideshare with her laptop bag slung over one shoulder, Thai takeout in the other hand, already fantasizing about sweatpants and silence. But halfway down the hallway, she saw them point, two silhouettes standing at her door, her mother's stiff posture, her father's hands clasped behind his back like he was rehearsing a lecture. Their faces were unreadable, but their presence was accusatory, like she had kept them waiting. She didn't speak. She didn't speed up. She just walked to her door, unlocked it, and said nothing. They walked inside without invitation. "No, can we come in?" "No, do you have a minute?" Just entitlement. Muscle memory. Her father dropped onto the couch, spreading out as if he owned the place. Her mother started pacing, arms crossed tightly, eyes scanning the apartment like it was a courtroom, and she was evaluating evidence against her own daughter. Oki set the takeout down on the counter, slipped off her shoes and asked flatly, "What do you want?" Her mother turned sharply. "We need to talk about Ashley." There it was. No greeting. No apology. Straight to business. Oki leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Okay. Talk." Her father cleared his throat, adopting the serious tone he used when explaining stock markets or lecturing about responsibility. Ashley's internship ended unexpectedly. Her tuition payment is overdue. We need your help. We need your help. Not, Ashley needs help. Not, could you help? We need. As if she were a subordinate employee they were managing, her mother nodded, adding, yes, things are tight right now, and if you could resume the transfers, just until she's back on her feet, we'd appreciate it. The audacity hit Oki like a slap. 3 weeks of silence. Not one word acknowledging what they'd said at Delmonico's. Not one sign of remorse. Just demands. She laughed. It wasn't a soft, polite laugh. It was short, sharp, and edged with disbelief. Her mother bristled immediately. Don't be petty. Oki stepped forward. Petty? I paid her tuition for years. Covered your bills. I helped with the mortgage. And you said you wished I'd never been born. Her father didn't flinch. Didn't apologize. He just waved a hand dismissively. We were angry. You made a scene. Oki stared at him, stunned, not by what he said but by how effortlessly he said it. No, she replied, voice steady. You made the scene. I just walked out of it. Her mother stepped closer, tone shifting into something manipulative. So familiar it almost triggered muscle memory. We're family. Families help each other. Ashley is struggling. We need to pull together. Oki shook her head slowly. You don't get to play that card now. Her father's jaw tightened. We raised you. That line, weaponized nostalgia, was meant to shut down arguments. To guilt her into obedience. She didn't blink. You didn't raise me, she said quietly. You drained me. The words landed with a visible impact. Her father's face went red, the vein in his temple twitching. Her mother's eyes flashed with rage, pupils narrowing, breath sharpening. They weren't hurt. They were furious that she dared to articulate the truth out loud. Because powerless children are tolerable. But self-aware adults are dangerous. Her mother opened her mouth, ready to unleash a tornado, but Oki cut her off with a raised hand. I'm not done. Silence snapped into place immediately, thick and electric. Her parents froze, not out of respect, but because they hadn't expected her to take control of the room. All her life she'd been background noise. Tonight she was the main voice. My father's face went red. My mother's eyes flashed with rage. But I wasn't done. What I said next made them go completely silent. I walked to the door. But not to leave. What I did next changed everything. Oki took a deep breath and walked to the door, not to escape, but to confront it fully. Her hand gripped the cold doorknob, and when she swung it open, the bright hallway light spilled into her dim apartment, casting her parents' stiff silhouettes in stark relief. For the first time in years she felt the weight shift. This wasn't a confrontation she was entering. It was one she was controlling. She held the door wide, letting them see her fully. If you came to apologize, she said, voice calm but sharp, I'd listen. Truly listen. They didn't move. Didn't speak. Silence. Her mother's arms tightened across her chest, her father's hands clenched at his sides, but neither had the courage to say a word. Oki tilted her head, letting the pause stretch just enough to unsettle them. But if you came to ask for more, she continued, eyes locking onto theirs, that conversation ended the night you disowned me. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. Someday you'll realize you need your family. Oki smiled faintly. Not the forced smile of childhood, but the clear, unshakable one of someone who finally understood her own power. Clarity washed over her, effortless and bright, like breathing freely after years underwater. She stood taller, shoulders back, heart steady. Consider me as if I never existed, she said, her voice unwavering. Live your lives as though there was never a daughter named Oki. Her father froze, lips parting. Her mother's face blanched, eyes searching for leverage, a loophole, a single word she could twist. There was nothing. Nothing at all. That Oki's gaze softened, but only slightly. She spoke the last command. It's time for you to leave. They looked at each other, calculating. Then, slowly, deliberately, they stepped backward out of the apartment. No apology. No confrontation. No final pleas. Just the quiet shuffle of feet on the hallway carpet and the soft click of the door closing behind them. The apartment was hers. Completely. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt alive, full of space to breathe, think, and finally rest. Every inch of it belonged to her. She sank onto the couch for a moment, letting the stillness settle like sunlight through the blinds. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel the shadow of expectation pressing down. There was no guilt, no obligation, no lingering doubt. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that signals loneliness. The kind of quiet that signals freedom. And in that quiet, Oki realized something incredible. She had finally taken back her life after they left. I waited for the guilt to come. For the regret. For the voice telling me I'd made a mistake. But it never came. Instead, something incredible happened in the days after they left. Something unexpected happened. I started to bloom. The first few mornings were almost surreal. Oki woke up expecting guilt to hit her like a tidal wave. Something that would remind her she'd crossed a line, that she'd made a mistake. But nothing came. Just quiet. A stillness she had been chasing, unknowingly. For decades, work became a sanctuary. The restructuring project, which had seemed impossible only months ago, began closing beyond forecast. Clients renewed contracts faster than anticipated, praising the clarity and efficiency Oki had brought to the process. Her manager, who had once simply tolerated her presence, finally looked at her with something like awe. "You're ready," he said, sliding a leadership contract across the table. No hesitation, no testing. Just trust. And for the first time, she didn't question whether she deserved it. She accepted, knowing she had earned every bit of it. The magazine article continued to resonate far beyond what she'd imagined. Messages poured in from strangers, thousands of them, each sharing fragments of their own lives and the courage her words had given them. "Thank you for saying what we couldn't. You gave me permission to leave. You helped me find my voice." Every note was a mirror of her own experience. A validation that her story, once silenced in her own home, now spoke loudly to the world. Standing in a room lit by screens and faces she'd never met but somehow understood, she felt the strange, comforting symmetry of connection. Some evenings, she lingered in the office longer than needed, letting the hum of fluorescent lights and quiet chatter fill the space that used to feel so empty. And then she'd go home, slip past the door her parents had once crossed with demands, and step onto her balcony. The Seattle skyline pulsed beneath the mist, city lights stretching like tiny constellations across the water and glass towers. Oki took a deep breath and thought of the girl who had spent years trying to earn love that would never come. She was gone, and in her place stood someone steadier, quieter, undeniably whole. Someone who no longer measured herself by the approval of others, someone who had finally claimed her life as her own. And as she looked out over the city, the mist swirling around the towers and streets below, she realized something extraordinary. Freedom wasn't about removing people from your life. It was about reclaiming yourself. And then one night, as I stood on my balcony looking at the city lights, I realized something that changed everything. Standing there in the Seattle night, I finally understood. It was the last night of that season of my life, the chapter that had stretched from disappointment to confrontation, from fear to freedom. I stood on my balcony, the water reflecting the glimmer of city lights below, each wave of mist carrying away the weight I had been dragging for decades. I wasn't wishing for a phone call. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I wasn't rehearsing what I'd say if they showed up again. I was simply breathing. Steady, unhurried, free. And in that quiet I realized. Maybe I was never the daughter they wanted, but I became the woman I needed. Strong, whole, and finally unapologetic for taking up space in the world. If you've ever carried the weight of a family that couldn't see you, know this. You are not alone. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You deserve to be seen. Share your story in the comments below. Let's build a community of people who chose themselves, who broke free of the invisible chains that kept them small. And if you want more stories of resilience, strength, and choosing yourself, hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next, because your story matters. And you deserve to be seen.